Hello everyone and welcome to your Introduction to Sociology course. My name is Tiffany Bush and I will be your instructor for this course. You may call me Miss Bush or Professor Bush, whichever you prefer. Please do not call me by my first name. If you are listening to this, then that means that you were able to get on Blackboard and find this week's materials, which is great, and you have read the syllabus. Fingers crossed, so that you know what is expected of you throughout the semester and what we will be doing. For this course, I have assigned the 7th edition of The Real World and Introduction to Sociology. I have also signed our class up for a program through the university, which allows you to have access of the ebook and online course materials on the first day of class. This means that you will not have to worry about buying or returning any books. Instead, your student account will be billed automatically after the dropout date. Additionally, the university has negotiated a reduced price, so you will actually be paying less by being a part of this program. You can choose to opt out of the program if you'd like, but please know that you will have to buy a textbook with a registration code so that you can also work on online course materials. Also, please note that these audio lectures will not talk about everything that we read in the book, and I may talk about things that aren't even in the book. However, exams will include both material in the book and the lectures, so please read the chapters assigned and listen to the lectures. For this week, I have assigned part of Chapter 1. I have assigned pages 1 through 19, which examines the definition of sociology, the sociological imagination, and briefly mentions the levels of analysis. I will be talking about these topics throughout the lecture, so I hope that by the end of the lecture you'll be able to achieve these learning objectives. First, I hope that you're able to define sociology in your own words, and I hope that you're able to understand how sociology is different from other social sciences. I also want you to define the sociological imagination and match the correct sociologist to this theory. It is a very important concept for sociologists, so I want you to have a clear understanding of what it is and how you can apply it to your real-life experiences. I will be providing my own real-life experiences, and I will look at them through the lens of the sociological imagination. By the end of this lecture, I hope that you will be able to apply it to your own life experiences and post it in the discussion board. So first, let's examine what sociology is. Sociology is one of the social sciences, and the social sciences are disciplines that examine the human or social world. Examples of social sciences include fields such as anthropology, psychology, economics, and political science. The social sciences focus on understanding the social world in the same way that the natural sciences focus on understanding the natural or physical world. Social scientists and natural scientists even use many of the same research methods, including the scientific method. Social scientists employ many different kinds of research methods, which we'll learn about in Chapter 2. This figure can be found in your textbook. It is figure 1.1, and it shows sociology and the social sciences. As you can see, sociology overlaps with other social sciences. However, much of the territory it covers is unique in its own way. That means that even though there may be some similarities between sociology and the other social sciences, sociology is also unique. However, it can also be confused with some of the other social sciences. In particular, it's often confused with psychology. They are usually thought of as the same thing or very similar. And I hope that you realize at the end of this chapter that sociology is actually very different from psychology. Sociology examines individuals and their relationships and interactions to outside forces. It looks at society as a whole. However, psychology, on the other hand, focuses on the internal states of the mind. So psychology looks at the individual thoughts that a person has, and it is a lot different from sociology. Let's try to take our understanding of sociology a little further by exploring its definition. The textbook provides this definition. Sociology is the systematic or scientific study of human society and social behavior, from large-scale institutions and mass culture to small groups and individual interactions. According to Howard Becker, sociology is the study of people doing things together because neither the individual nor society exists independently of one another. Human beings are social beings, and without the contact of other people, we would not be the unique individuals that we are. I know that the definition the textbook provides is very long and can seem daunting and maybe even confusing, so I'll try to break it down a little. If we think of it this way, ology means the study of, and socio means society. Therefore, sociology means the study of society. Sociologists are interested in all aspects of society, which consists of a group of people who shape their lives in patterned ways and distinguish their groups from other groups. So, the United States is a society. How are individuals in the U.S. different from other individuals in other countries? How are individuals living in the southern states different from or similar to those living in Midwestern states? These are things that sociologists are interested in and study. So before looking at sociology's focus, I really kind of want to talk about social institutions. And sometimes people think of these as physical buildings or locations, but institutions are not these things. Instead, they're structures that make up our society. Education, economics, and politics are all great examples of institutions. If we take an example of education as an institution, we can see that in some societies, education is not available for all children. Therefore, the structure of education in those societies will be much different than the structure of education in our society. So knowing this, we can see that sociology looks at a broad range of institutions to better understand social relationships. Sociology can help us develop a sociological perspective, which is a way of looking at the world through a sociological lens. Sociologists have developed several approaches for developing a sociological perspective. In your book, you will read about the expert mind, culture shock, and the sociological imagination. However, in this lecture, we will only focus on the sociological imagination. In order to understand the sociological imagination, we first have to learn about the theorist who coined the term. The image of the person in this slide is C. Wright Mills, and he is a 20th century American sociologist. He is the one that came up with the sociological imagination. His main work included social inequality and studying the relationship between individuals and society. He wrote the book, The Sociological Imagination, in 1959, and that is how we have come to understand what it is. You don't have to worry about writing the date down or memorizing it. I won't ask about dates on exams. I just like providing them in my slides in case you are curious. As I mentioned previously, the sociological imagination is a term that is coined by C. Wright Mills. It is a quality of the mind that all great social analysts and sociologists possess. It allows us to understand how our individual problems are connected to larger cultural and socio-historical forces and processes. In his book, C. Wright Mills provides a distinction between biography or personal troubles and history or public issues. He often uses biography and personal troubles interchangeably. He also uses history and public issues interchangeably, which is why I have provided both. Personal troubles are private problems experienced within the character of the individual and the range of their immediate relation to others. Public issues, on the other hand, are those that lie beyond one's personal control and the range of one's inner life. I know that this concept can seem confusing, so I will be providing a few real-life examples, and I will look at them through the perspective of the sociological imagination. But before I begin talking about my examples of the sociological imagination, I first wanted to show you this chart, which I think helps especially if you're a visual learner. The sociological imagination in this chart is actually in the middle. I've outlined it in red. And it's the interaction between biography and society, society and history and biography. It's the relationship between all three of these things. So my first example is unemployment. If you've ever been unemployed, couldn't find a job, or even lost a job, then you'll understand this example fairly well. So if you're unemployed, you might wonder if it's a personal trouble. Did you lose your job because you took too many days off work, or you kept messing up while you were on the job, or you got into arguments with other coworkers? If you do mistakes like these, then it might be a personal trouble, and that might explain why you are unemployed. But it could be more than that. It could be something that was out of your control. It could have been a public issue. Were a lot of individuals at your work losing their jobs because of budget cuts? Were unemployment rates high? So if we look at things through the public issue lens, then we can see that there are bigger factors outside of ourselves that may affect whether or not we are employed. If I look at my own experiences, I can think back to a time when I was a teenager and I wanted a job, a minimum wage job, and so I applied for every position at any fast food restaurant or store around, but I couldn't get a job. And I didn't know if it was a personal trouble, if it was my fault. Maybe I didn't have enough references, or my references weren't good enough. I also didn't know if it was a public issue. Maybe other things outside of my control were happening, and I just wasn't aware. I was able to dig up a graph that represented unemployment rate from 2009 to 2019. The black line represents women 20 years and over. At the time, I wasn't even 20 years old. However, I am a woman, so I clicked on that to represent me. I also looked at white individuals, which is represented by the light blue line, and total unemployment rate overall, which is the red line. The year that I went looking for a job was in 2014, and I have circled that in red. As we can see, the unemployment rate during that year was really high. In fact, it was higher than all the years before. If we look at it this way, then it might suggest that the reason I couldn't find a job was because the unemployment rate was high. It wasn't a personal trouble or an issue that I had with myself, but rather it was something that was out of my control. I also wanted to examine unemployment rates for individuals that were around my age at the time. So this graph represents unemployment rates for 16 to 19-year-olds. And again, the year that I circled in red is 2014, which was when I was looking for a job. And we can see that unemployment rates are much higher for children aged 16 to 19 than they were for others. It is actually 27.5%. So again, this wasn't a personal trouble for me, but rather a public issue. Another example that I can provide you with is coffee. I love coffee. I drink it every day. I need it to live, to thrive. I depend on it all the time. So, is my drinking coffee, is that a personal trouble? It's obviously a part of my daily routine. And if you're like me, you might even invite a coworker or a friend for a cup of coffee. I've done that a lot of times. So, maybe I just drink coffee because I like it. It could also be a public problem or public issue. It's not really a problem. And we can see that coffee has symbolic value as part of our daily social activities. We can argue that coffee is not just a drink. It has a symbolic value. It has rituals. Often the ritual of drinking coffee is much more important than the act of drinking coffee itself. When we go out to drink with our friends with coffee, oftentimes we don't care what we drink. We're more interested in the conversations that we have. But yet it is a ritual for us to order a coffee or talk over a cup of coffee. We can also see that caffeine is a socially acceptable drug in our society. It has caffeine, which has stimulating effects on the brain, but it's socially acceptable. Therefore, coffee addicts like myself aren't considered drug users in the Western culture, although they might be in others. Coffee is also tied to social and economic relationships. When you buy and drink coffee, there are continuous transactions between you and the ones producing, packaging, distributing, and marketing the coffee, which affects many cultures, social groups, and organizations within each culture. So hopefully my examples of coffee and unemployment have helped you to understand the sociological imagination just a little bit better. Before I end this lecture, I want to talk about levels of analysis, which I will also bring up in next week's lecture. Sociologists can use different levels of analysis to explore social relationships. In many ways, personal troubles and public issues are very similar to micro and macro sociology. Microsociology examines small group interactions to see how they impact larger institutions in society. They might look at the relationship between a couple or the interaction of a sports team, or even the short interaction between a cashier and a shopper. Macrosociology, on the other hand, examines large-scale social structures to determine how they impact groups and individuals. They might look at the economy and how it impacts consumer behavior, or how a presidential election influences American morale. I wanted to provide this figure, which can also be found in your textbook. It is the macro-micro continuum, and we can see that sociology covers a wide range of topics at different levels of analysis. Society, which is the largest part, is the macro-sociological level of analysis, and the self, which is the smaller part, is the micro-sociological level of analysis. So, to review, we have explored the concept and definition of sociology. We have also looked at the sociological imagination, and I have provided you with two examples. One is unemployment and the other is coffee. I have also mentioned micro and macro sociology, which we will talk about in the next PowerPoint or audio lecture that I provide to you. Okay, so that's basically the end of the first week's lecture. Just to remind you, now that you've listened to the lecture, you will need to participate in a discussion. So you will post an introduction of yourself and discuss the sociological imagination. I've provided you with a link to a YouTube video on the sociological imagination. It talks about it more in depth and provides a couple other examples. And I would also like you to prepare for next week by finishing Chapter 1. Please let me know if you have any issues through email or office hours. Have a great week.